That video, you can go back and watch it anytime, not that you'd necessarily want to, folks, but it does outline the process. Now, here's what I want to show you. If you go back to the licensing, and this is also available in your LMS, the Learning Management System, and I told you we were going to talk about this. This book, we call it the Relinc book, and so it's the very first link under licensing, real estate licensing in North Carolina, and as I said, it's also in your online system. And so this just kind of outlines everything that video said in more detail, right? This is the book on how to get your license. Talks about the education, talks about the background check, talks about what to expect for the test. Now, I'm not going to read this book to you because hopefully you all have the ability to read, just like you can answer 2 plus 2 for me. But I'm going to focus on a couple of things and point out a few things. So this book, as I said, I'm not going to go into everything, but I am going to introduce like some of the first testable stuff in here, but don't worry, we're going to talk about it in other places within the slides and the material, but you kind of get like a little bit of an introduction to it. Let me see if I can close that so you can see a little bit more. So let me scroll down here. Here is kind of going hand in hand with what Beverly just said, folks. You're going to have to understand that language is critically important in this class, right? One word can mean something very specific, and another word means something completely opposite. And there's a lot of synonyms for a lot of different things. And so, to Beverly's point, some states operate with what we call salespeople and brokers. North Carolina has transitioned to what's called a broker-only state, which means you have to be a broker when you get your license in North Carolina. But there are different statuses for your broker's license. So right here on this slide, folks, this is, by the way, over my shoulder, this is a broker's license. And so every single one of you will get if you get your license, it'll be the exact same one I have. But it'll be on a different status than mine. And so every license in North Carolina is issued initially on what we call provisional status. We call you a provisional broker, or a PB for short. That's where you're most likely going to start. And then there are certain things that have to happen to move from provisional broker to full broker. Spoiler alert, it's more education. This is not the only class you will ever take as a broker in North Carolina. This is the starting point in which you get your license. There is 3 30-hour post-licensing courses. And you have 18 months from your initial licensure to take them, or in other words, a year and a half. And that is how you move from provisional broker to a broker. And then, of course, most people elect to stay there at just a broker status. But you can take it a little bit further. And in North Carolina, we have something called a broker in charge. We call that a BIC for short, broker in charge, BIC. There is another status called BIC eligible. It's the exact same legal criteria as a BIC. The difference is somebody who's BIC eligible is sitting at the ready to be a broker in charge, right? They're not actively managing anybody, but a broker in charge is. They're actively managing a sole proprietorship or a firm. That is the only difference there. Do you ever have to go to that level? No. And not in any way, shape, or form. So this is just an introduction to those categories. We're going to talk about these in great detail in some of your introductory slides that we're going to get into. But these categories are extremely testable in North Carolina portion of the test. Now, the national portion, you will not see these terms on a national portion. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. This just goes into a little more detail on the different statuses and how you move from each. As I said, I'm going to teach that to you shortly. I just want to focus on a couple of things. One thing that I do want to impress upon you right here, right now, as you're, fresh into this learning, the broker's license I just mentioned have those 4 different statuses. But there are 2 other types of licenses that are also extremely testable in North Carolina. One is called a firm license, and it is for entities. When I say entities, I mean limited liability companies, or LLCs for short, corporations, partnerships, things of that nature. It means you created an entity with the Secretary of State that wants to do brokerage activities. And I'm sure you have all heard of Keller Williams and Coldwell Banker and Remax and Century 21. These are brokerage firms, meaning somebody has created an entity, and an entity needs its own separate license. So we call that a firm license, different than the people license called a broker's license. And then the last other license that we're really going to talk about in North Carolina is what's called an LNCL. Now, folks, there are a lot of categories in this course that sound like one thing and they're not even remotely what they sound like. It's kind of cruel in that regard. However, this is one of the rare things that is exactly what it sounds like. It is called a limited non-resident commercial license. It is limited. It is for people who do not live in North Carolina, and it is to transact commercial brokerage only. It is a separate license. But we'll get into that once again a little more in detail later. So we've got the one license with 4 categories called a broker's license, and these 2 other ones, firm license and limited non-resident commercial license. But as I said, this is an introduction. I'm teaching them to you more in detail later. Here's the basic licensing process as it was outlined in that video. Step 1, this class. Step 2, background check. Step 3, license application. And step 4, license examination. All of those have to be completed in order to get your license in North Carolina. Of course, it outlined the license requirement. Folks, the criteria for this class, 18, sane, and sober. And, heck, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, all right? So you got to be a legal citizen. You got to be at least 18. You got to be all these different things. So hopefully you meet this criteria or have a social security number, all that jazz. What it talked about in the class or in the video about the class is sometimes you don't have to take it. Most people, this is the education requirement you have to meet. But there are other options for those people who are actively licensed in other states. Of course, if you are an attorney in the state of North Carolina, you can, of course, opt out of taking this class. There's a couple exceptions. Most people don't fall into those, and so they have to take this course. Plus, taking the course is a good idea anyway in practicing in this state. Here's where it talks about the application process, but I want to focus on a specific thing. This is all the details that you got to put on your license. Here's where I want to focus for a second for a couple reasons. All right. Consideration of applicant's character. Part of the requirements to get a license in North Carolina is having the requisite character. And that means several different things, but part of that is they're going to make you do a criminal background check. And it has to be done through their specific resource. Here is the information for the resource right here. So I do not suggest doing this yet, and here's why. These background checks are good for 6 months only, and we're going to be spending quite a few weeks together. And imagine that if you don't pass the class the first time and you got to wait 2 months to enroll in it again, you've wasted your time. So number 1, only do the background check if you're feeling pretty warm and fuzzy that you're going to pass. And number 2, I would suggest doing it with about 3 weeks left in class. I used to say earlier, but they've been very fast. If you've got, some of you are like born and raised in North Carolina, yours is probably going to come back very fast. I think the average time frame is less than a week, and the average cost is about $50. It gets more expensive, and it takes a lot longer the more complex your background is. So I have seen students get it back in 2 days, and it costs $10. I have seen students take 3 months, and it costs $400. It depends on how many places you've lived. If you've lived in other countries, it depends on a lot of things. So there is no one size fits all. But for the average person with a not so crazy background, not lived so many crazy places, I would say do it about 3 weeks towards the end of class. And you do have to use this link. And so if you ask me down the road, I'll point you back here. Now, the other thing is, folks, it is exceptionally thorough. Exceptionally thorough. So if you are sitting here thinking to yourself, I wonder if this is going to show up on my criminal background check. It probably is. And so here's just a little piece of advice. If you have any of those in the back of your mind, if you go back to that apply for a license page we were on, there is this link called a petition for predetermination. This is where you can reach out to the Real Estate Commission and say, hey, I've got this on my record. Do you think that I will be okay and I'll be able to get a license? And it's never a guarantee, but they'll tell you, yeah, you stand a good chance, or no, you probably shouldn't waste your time. And I'll give you a couple examples in case any of you need to hear this. I had one student who had something on her record, and the story goes that she went back into her ex's house to get something that was hers, but she got a breaking and entering charge for it. I don't know. There's 2 sides to every story, but she got her license. She did have to do a character conference with the real estate commission though, so she actually had to go and talk to them and explain her side of the story. I had another student who just recently got her license, and she had a speeding in a school zone that was over a certain amount that was considered criminal, but it was like 9 years ago and it still popped up, or like 7 years ago. So they had to like reach out to her and they said, hey, we're debating on yours. We may need some additional information. She didn't have to go in front of anybody, but they did have to like take extra time to think about it. So just so you know, they are incredibly thorough and they want to make sure you have the requisite character. No tickets are probably not going to stop you from getting a real estate license. If you're a felon for embezzlement or something like that, they may have a harder time giving you a license because you're helping people invest lots of money in real estate, and kind of a little more, questionable. So just keep that in mind. As I said, this is the link for the background check information, and I'll remind you when we get a little closer to the end of class to start thinking about doing that. Here's just some examples of different things that might be considered character issues. The petition for predetermination we were just talking about. Here's where it gets into the exam, folks. Now, this is the state licensing exam. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. They have that thing under lock and key. I have never seen the state licensing exam. I have begged and begged and begged for them to let us see it. They don't. And so all we know is what they tell us is testable on the syllabus. And I'll get into that more in a second. But here's just some example formats of questions. Primary body of law governing the relationship between a seller of real estate and the broker with whom the seller lists the property is known as and they're all multiple choice, A, B, C, or D. Of course, there are also word problems that end up being math problems. And there are some negatives in there, right? Like accepts, and we'll talk more about this as time goes on as well, because there is a test taking strategy for these, but I'll focus on that later. Here's where I told you I was going to circle back to the 2024 syllabus. This right here, folks, is how they break down the testable categories on the state licensing exam. There are 8 testable categories on both the state and the national exam. And it tells you how many questions are in each category. So real property, ownership, valuation, contracts and agency, real estate practice, property disclosures, financing, and real estate math, national. And then on the state portion, licensure, agency, supervision/compensation, brokerage practice, taxes, insurance, contracts, closings, landlord, tenant, and other North Carolina laws. So if you go back to that 2024 syllabus, they have it broken into those testable categories. And so that is the only thing that the 2024 syllabus is really useful for, is looking at the different things that they deem to be testable in those respective categories between state and national. That's it. So for the sake of the course, the 2023 syllabus is all the same testable material, and it's, flows as I'm teaching it to you. But if you're interested in what they could be testing on in those individual categories, that's what this syllabus is useful for. And so you can actually see the breakdown of the questions and how many are in each. Now, folks, understand that everything I'm going to teach you potentially testable, but you will hear me point out this is way more testable than this. There's going to be more questions on this, and as you can see, it's very standouty, right? Brokerage practice, agency, and other NC laws. That's a lot of questions between those 3 categories alone. I mean, things like landlord tenant, 3 questions, whatever, right? If you've only got finite time to study the most testable things. I mean, you need to know it all, but study the most testable things. So this is just a useful breakdown. Now, mine kind of closely mirrors this. It's impossible for me to be exact because I don't know what their test looks like, but the question breakdown's similar. And then here's the other thing too. I'm going to say a word that some of you are going to hate. And I'm going to make you feel warm and fuzzy about it, but then I'm also going to give you some tough love about it too, okay? Those of you who are coming into my class, and if this 4-letter word makes you throw up in your mouth, math, okay? You're not alone. There's a lot of adult learners who come through the class, and they just hate the word math, and it makes them cry inside, die inside, a little bit of both. Now, here's the thing. The math is not overly difficult in this class, but if you're not good at math, it will feel that way. Now here's the warm and fuzzy piece. There are seven math questions total on the state licensing exam, and they are only on the national side. That being said, it is very possible to pass both my class exam and the state licensing exam and not get a single math question right. And if that excites you, here's the tough love piece. You are endeavoring into a career where you are helping people invest hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And I promise you're going to figure out how to do math when that commission check calculation is that question, okay? So you might as well get better at math instead of taking like, I don't have to get any math questions right. No, not technically, but you should strive for it because you want those 7 questions. Listen, you're more likely to get 7 questions wrong elsewhere than the math, so you better get those 7 math questions right because otherwise you're missing a lot real quick. Everybody with me? Yeah, there you go. So that's really all I want to focus on in the Relinc book. Of course, you have access to this, and as I pointed out, this is day 1. I've already bombarded you with a lot. You're not going to remember this, but I'll always point you back to this if you ask me to. So these slides are things we already discussed from the Relinc book between the criminal background check and how things flow. This is just an informative piece that may or may not be important to you folks here. And I don't know if you caught it on the videos. Understand that when you pass this class, I'm trying to manifest it for you. I said when, not if, when. When you pass this class is good for 3 years. 3 years. So after you pass this class and you finish your license application, that opens up a 180-day exam eligibility window. And you have to complete your exam and have your background check in that 180-day window in order to be issued your license. Now, if you do not pass the sections of the licensing exam, in that 180-day window, it will close, but your course is good for 3 years, so all you have to do is apply again. It means new background check, new application, and you can open up a new 180-day exam eligibility window because this course is good for 3 years. So, just so we're all on the same page. And then, of course, if you have to retake the state licensing exam, you can only take it every 10 days after failing. Now, folks, before we get into learning, I didn't give you this spiel yet, okay? And I would just want to explain something to you. Number one, if you haven't figured this out in the brief time we've spent together, it should be illegal to love your job as much as I do. I thoroughly enjoy getting to teach you fine folks real estate, and I teach all the classes under the sun, and I have a good time doing it. That being said, though, I'm also... There's a couple words that come to mind, but let's just say I like to be the best, okay? And so as such, I've already kind of touted how good my test numbers are right now. And the thing is, as an educator, and I'm also the education director for this school, and so we get judged based on you folks and whether or not you pass the state licensing exam. Here's how it works. If you pass this class, and you take your state licensing exam within 30 days of passing my class, and you pass the state licensing exam, that's where I gave you my metric of 100%, knock on wood thus far. They judge us based on whether you pass or fail, and if any of you go and you take your state licensing exam within 30 days, it dings me if you fail it, and so that would lower my passing numbers. And as I said, I like to win. Okay, so here's what I'm getting at here, folks, okay? I promise that I'm going to do my darndest and help you in every way, shape, and form to make you successful, help you pass this class, and furthermore, help you pass the state licensing exam. In return, though, I ask that if you're one of those people that the blind squirrel finding a nut people, and you just get lucky and pass my class test and you had no business passing it, but you got lucky and you did it anyway, and there's no chance of you passing the state licensing exam, I ask that you wait till day 31 to take it, okay? Because listen, I don't need that negativity in my life. You're messing up my good numbers just because you got a little lucky and don't really know. Here's the thing. If you know this stuff and you're ready, take it. I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader, but if you don't know what you're doing, don't take that test within the first 30 days. You know what's going to happen, folks? Let me equate this for you. When you go, I'm going to get this in like feedback, right? It's going to tell me, oh, student failed your test. And I'm going to see my numbers change. And then what's going to happen is, you ever see those like horror movies, right? The day, if you go and you take that test and you fail it, it's going to be like one of those crazy, stormy, rainy nights where it's like lightning outside. And you're going to be in your living room and you're going to be thinking to yourself, oh, it's nasty and scary outside. The power's going to flicker a little bit. And you're going to be looking out there and you're going to see like the little street lamp that you can see from your house. And it's going to flicker and it's going to go off. And it's going to come back on. And you're going to see my silhouette out there. And then it's going to go back off again. You're going to be like, did you see that? I swear to God, I just saw a silhouette. It looked like my real estate instructor. I'm not even kidding, babe. I swear to God, I don't know. And then, like, your light's going to flicker inside your house, and you're just going to hear my voice behind him, like, I heard you failed your test. And then nobody's going to ever see you again, right? Like, you're just going to disappear, and nobody will ever hear from you again. Now, for legal purposes, this is a joke, okay? Ha, 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 ha. Let's not test this theory out, okay? I'm a very proud man. I like good testing scores. So nobody do me dirty, because I'm not going to do you dirty. If you need help, I will always help you to make sure you pass it. But don't do me dirty. Everybody with me? All right. Nobody needs to be the next Halloween movie. It's that time of year, okay? We don't need that negativity in our lives. So...